All right, and yes, WT Visitor, you are correct. Awesome, there is that. And if you check the stream, there's probably about a 10-second delay, just audio, letting you know and stuff. But it should be live at this point now. Um, sure. So there's that, and here's the WebEx. WebEx looks good. Okay, so if you guys need to ask a question or something for Adam, otherwise he won't hear us, I have mics. So, um, I can pass them around, whatever. If you have questions, let me know. Off. And then wanted to say thank you. Mr. Michael Lombardi got and talked to Adam here to present for us. And so wanted to thank Adam here for presenting and kind of turn it over to you whenever you're ready to go.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate you listening to me. Um, so what I'm going to be talking about is a kind of a project and eventually product that I've been working on over the last about year or so, which is PowerShell Universal Dashboard. So the general concept here is it's just a PowerShell module that you can actually install right from the PowerShell gallery, and then you can start building dashboards and websites and REST APIs with PowerShell script. So if you want to see an example of this actually up and running up on Azure, you can actually go to poshud.com and check out all the controls that it supports and kind of see what a dashboard is capable of. But what I'm going to do today is kind of step through a bunch of examples and kind of show you guys different ways that you can use the dashboard and get into some of the nitty gritty of how you get certain things done with the dashboard. First of all, installing the dashboard, like I said, it's just available on the PowerShell gallery. So you can just use install module, specify universal dashboard, and it'll actually download and install universal dashboard on your machine. So I actually have universal dashboard installed on this machine already. Can you guys see this? Is this big enough or should I? You all good? Okay. Um, so once you have it installed, you can actually just start up a dashboard by saying start UD dashboard and specify a port. And what it's going to actually do is start up an ASP.NET web server inside your PowerShell console. So this is the same web server that C# developers and stuff like that are using to host their content. And what Start UD dashboard without any parameters does is it actually starts an instance of poshud.com on your local machine. So once you have that running on your local machine, you can kind of see it, changing some of the data and that kind of thing. On the left-hand side, you'll see that it has a bunch of kind of examples and documentation just built right into the module. So you can click through these different pages and then see the different components that you can use inside your dashboard. So we have buttons. You can do interactive charts. You can do things like grids where you can show different types of data and sort and filter those kinds of things. Show basic things like images. So anything you kind of expect from a website. So what we're actually going to do here live is kind of build a dashboard from the ground up using VS Code and just a PowerShell script that I have written here. So this is a dashboard that is running on my box. It's actually going out to Giphy and getting a random kitten GIF every like 5 seconds and showing it. But I'm just going to kind of go through the basics of how to get started with UD and then what you can do with it. So let's actually look at just a little bit about the product. So if we pop over to, I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger. Maybe like 20, 26. Oh, don't make it that big. Okay. So if we pop over to VS Code, you can see that homepage that I was showing is just a series of PowerShell commandlet calls to produce the different HTML elements that you see on the page. I have a little div at the top to put a little space using new to UD element. And then you can do things like rows and columns, This actually shows that image by using the new UD image commandlet. But I'll get into the details of that in a little bit. But let's kind of go through the basics. So if I just uncomment this section of code, what you're going to see is UD will automatically reload the page when you edit your dashboard. So new elements will appear, and you can kind of play with the different elements, and then your dashboard will automatically reload as you add new elements to it. And you can kind of see how that changes the dashboard. So Universal Dashboard uses Google's material design principles, and it actually uses a third-party library called Materialize to produce those designs. So you can see these two things here are cards. Cards are just for kind of showing data in different ways. You can put images and additional information, that kind of thing. You can make them responsive, so you can actually make it so that you can pop more information up and down. So some of the things about UD include creating websites with PowerShell. That includes dashboards or more interactive websites if you want to. The other big use case for UD is exposing REST APIs. So you can actually turn your PowerShell commandlets into REST APIs. So I'll show you guys some examples of how to do that. So now if we go to our next section. Some other things that UD provides are built-in authentication. So using PowerShell commandlets, you can expose authenticated dashboards that allow or enable users the ability to log into your dashboard, and you can secure your dashboard in different ways, either using OAuth providers, so like Microsoft, Twitter, Google, or Facebook, as well as forms auth. So you can actually take a username and password and authenticate against a database or Active Directory or something like that. It also offers tons of advanced customization. So not only can you get these kind of built-in controls like cards and buttons and checkboxes and that kind of stuff, you also get stuff like new UD element, which allows you to create any HTML element you want. So you can kind of produce your own custom dashboards if you really want to get kind of down and dirty with the actual HTML source. So one little thing to point out is that UD is actually built on Facebook's React JavaScript library. So even though I'm mentioning that you're creating these HTML elements, what it's actually doing is it's producing a React app in your browser. And because of that, it's actually way more optimized than a regular HTML and JavaScript page would be. It only needs to update certain elements based on what is changing on your page. So you'll kind of see some performance increases if you use UD versus just static HTML. Some other things about UD. You can host it anywhere. It's cross-platform. So from the beginning, this has been built on both PowerShell Core and PowerShell or Windows PowerShell. So you can run it on PowerShell v5 or PowerShell Core v6. Runs on Windows, Linux, Mac. I've actually had it running on Raspbian and Raspberry Pi and Windows 10 IoT. So I've been doing some like home automation stuff with it and kind of futzing with that kind of thing. And then you can host it anywhere. It runs the command line. You can run it in Azure and IIS. People have put it in Docker before, that kind of thing. Finally, before we get into the fun stuff, it's not actually open source or free at the moment. It's a product that I developed myself, and it's it's free to try. So dashboards will run for 1 hour after you install it. So you can run a dashboard, and every time I change this dashboard, it's actually restarting this dashboard, and that hour restarts. So I get a lot of questions about like, what does that mean? I can only run it for an hour. I can never test anything in an hour. It's just that's how long the dashboard will run before it no longer serves requests. But if you restarted that dashboard, you could just keep running it and keep testing it out. So it pretty much gives you the ability to, try it out, develop a dashboard, and you never have to pay anything. The other thing that is that it's free for open source projects. So if you have a cool open source project, you want to build a dashboard for it, just send me an email and I'll give you a license. Licenses are right now $99, and that's perpetual, so you can use it forever, and then you get free upgrades for a year. So I've priced it really, really low, but I kind of want to make it worth my time to keep developing this this product because I really enjoy working on it. So let's actually get into some more dashboard building. So one of the core concepts of building a dashboard is going to be laying out your dashboard. So you can see here that I have a bunch of different pages. There's a command called new UD page to develop these new pages, and when you do that and pass it into your dashboard command, it'll actually produce this little navigation bar, and then you can actually link out to these different pages. So if you typed in universal dashboard, it would actually go to the home page, that kind of thing. So let's actually look at how you lay out components on the dashboard. So if I pop into this layout setting, I'm using a couple of commandlets here. First, I'm using new UD heading. That just creates a text heading that you can specify text for or other content, and then size that content up and down. So in the HTML world, the largest heading is a 1 and the smallest heading is a 6. So this takes a 1 to a 6. So a 3 being somewhere in the middle. So the first way to lay out content inside Universal Dashboard is the new UD layout commandlet. So what this does is it says, I want a grid that is 3 columns wide. Those 3 columns will each take the same amount of space on the page, and then anytime you have more than 3 items underneath or within this script block for new UD layout, it'll make a new row. So you can see here I have 3 items. If we go back to the dashboard, you'll see it's produced 3 separate columns that are all equally the same size. If I were to take another component and then put it in there, what it's going to do is create another row underneath that layout, or that first row, and then so on and so forth. So if you want a really simple grid layout, that's the easiest way to go, is use new UD layout. So the library that I'm using for all the JavaScript and CSS inside Universal Dashboard is called Materialize, like I mentioned before. And what it uses is a grid system of 12 grids. So every row, or 12 columns. So every row can be up to 12 spaces wide. So each one of these columns is currently taking up 4 spaces out of your 12 columns that potentially could be on the screen. It's the same kind of grid system that you would see in another JavaScript library called Bootstrap. So based on that, what we can actually do is exercise a little more control in how our columns are laid out by specifying actual rows and columns rather than relying on new UD column to take care of that kind of formatting for us. So there is another commandlet called UD row that allows you to create a new row and then specify columns underneath that row. Like I said, every row has up to 12 different sizes or spaces that you can take up. So if I created a column that's 4 wide, another column that's 2 wide, and then a column that's 6 wide, that takes up all 12 of my spaces. So then you end up with a layout like this. So my first column was 4 wide, my second is 2 wide, and then my final one is 6 wide. So it kind of allows you to space your content a little more in a customized manner. All right. The other thing that you can do is not only can you change the size of the column, but you can also offset columns. So on the left-hand side here from column 1, there's actually no column there, but I've put an offset of 2, which means it takes up 2 of those spaces in my 12 spaces, and then it has a size of 4. So it gives you a lot of customization in the ability to kind of lay out your grid of components. And then finally, what's kind of nice about Materialize, the library that I'm using, is that it actually provides the ability to change on screen size. Sorry, I clicked a little bit too quickly there. This column has 3 different sizes. On small screens, it's going to take up all 12 of those spaces on that row. On medium-sized screens, it's going to take up 8 of those spaces. And on large screens, it's going to only take up 2 of those spaces. So that kind of allows you to make kind of like adaptable UIs that work on both phones all the way up to computer screens. So you can see here I have a very large screen, so I'm only taking up 2 spaces. But if I actually reduce the size of this, what you're going to see is this is actually going to adapt. Now I'm on a medium screen, it takes up 8 spaces. And if I go down to a small screen, then it takes up the whole width of that page. So it kind of provides the ability to make not only robust UIs that you can kind of mess with the layout, but you can also mess with the layout for different screen sizes. So those are kind of your layout options. You can, create pages. You can create these basic layout elements for rows and columns, and then move them around. Let's look at some of the other basic controls. I have some more examples here. I just created another page, and the first one we're going to look at is cards. So cards are, like I said, kind of a material design concept. That's Google's design. If you look at like Google Calendar Analytics or anything like that, they're using material design all over the place. And one of the concepts they have are cards. So a card is just kind of a data container, and cards have a lot of options. You can put titles, and then you can put like arbitrary content inside them. You could put charts inside here. You could put, like I'm just putting text in here. Cards also support things like adding links to the bottom of them and adjusting the color of those cards. So if we go back to the dashboard, you can see I've created 3 different cards. This is just a basic card with the title and some content. This card ends up with a link in it, and this card has background color and a font color, that kind of thing. But you saw in my About page, you can also get really complex with cards where you can actually have images and this little reveal style, that kind of thing going on. So another component that is inside UD is collections. So if you wanted to just kind of show a collection of data, you could use something like this. More or less, it's just a couple boxes with different information in them. You can put pretty much what you want in here. You can also put links on the right-hand side, that kind of thing. Another cool one that was added kind of recently are collapsibles. Collapsibles allow you to put data into little segments and then hide and show that data based on user clicks. It behaves in a couple different ways. You can do accordion style, or this is collapsible style, where it just allows you to open and close all different things. And like you see here, it supports icons and that kind of stuff. All right, some cool ones that I'll get into a lot more detail later are the ability to create inputs. So kind of like
Adam,
Windows.
quick
Sorry, go
question
ahead.
for you. Oh,
Yep.
no, quick question for you. Are those font awesome icons?
They are fun and awesome icons.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
And then one other quick question, like when you were looking at the resizing those things fluidly, where it was having 12 units, if there was another one, would it have pushed that like underneath the other one automatically when it resizes those?
Yep. Exactly. So if you go beyond 12, or if it resizes, it will push it to the next row.
Okay.
So
cool.
they won't actually ever overlap on top of each other or get pushed off the screen. It'll just push it down beneath
Sweet.
it.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so some of the input options that you have are things like buttons, kind of what you'd expect from like a Windows form or WPF app or any web app. Buttons, checkboxes, switches, selects, text boxes, that kind of thing. I'll get into a little more detail here. There's also event handlers that you can tie into your different input options, so you can kind of create these robust UIs that allow you to do all kinds of stuff. But what this kind of thing produces are just these little controls down here. So if I click this, you can see it sends up a little toast on the right-hand side here. A checkbox, a switch is kind of an on-off. It's very similar to a checkbox. Option drop-downs, and then a text box. So you can integrate that with your dashboard. There's also ways to create inputs. I can actually show you an example on here where it will take a function where you specify a param block, and then it will generate a form for you based on that param block. So since this is a string, it creates a text box. In this case, if it's a bool, it creates a checkbox. And then when you submit it, it will actually tell you whether or not it was checked or not, that kind of thing. Same with selects. So those are based on validate sets and bools and strings, that kind of thing. So similar to, what's the name of that? WebGia. There's another project that is something similar to this called WebGia. But if you don't want to actually lay out your whole text box and stuff like that, you can actually use new UD input to produce a similar input field as these. All right, so those are kind of some of the basic controls. There's a bunch more controls if you saw on here that you can kind of go through and futz with on PoshUD or install PowerShell or Universal Dashboard on your own and play with it. But I want to kind of get into some of the visualizations. So the basics are cool, but the visualizations are what people always get a kick out of. I actually am a big triathlete, so I'm actually training for another Ironman level triathlon right now. So I record all my activity in Strava, which is kind of like I don't know, map my run or whatever, where you can track your runs and bike rides and all that kind of stuff. So I actually created a PowerShell module for getting my Strava activity, so I can get my runs out, I can get all kinds of data about them. So this command here, what it's actually doing is it's going out to the Strava API. They just have a REST API you can call, and then it's getting all the activity that I've done this month. So this is the beginning of the month, and this is the current date. So I want to get all the activity for this month, and then just return it as a count. So if I were to go back to my dashboard now, sometime, did not reload. Sometimes this happens. So there's an auto reload setting that's causing this to auto reload, but you can always start and stop your dashboard. Otherwise, oh, maybe I should save it. That would help. All right. So you can see this is just a simple counter. It creates a card that has a title, and then it returns some value. Counters are really customizable. You can customize the format. You can show money. You can customize like if it's going to show commas or decimal places and that kind of stuff. So some of the things to note about this type of thing is that it's not a static. It's not static data. So a lot of the other components, what you'll notice is that I'm using content parameters here. So when you use a content parameter, it actually creates a static kind of HTML that is then rendered and shown on the screen. Whenever you use a component like these visualization components that expose an endpoint, that means that endpoint is actually called every single time someone visits your page. So to kind of demonstrate that, if I change this to get a random value and then add it onto my activity count, and once that reloads, you'll see I have a really high number, right? Because it just got some random value. But now if I reload it again, it's actually a different number because every single time I load this page, it's rerunning that script block to get a different number from my script block and display it in Universal Dashboard. So that's really cool. That means that your data is live. It's not static from when you generated it. It's actually happening in real time anytime someone visits your page. So counters are cool, but some other cool. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no worries. So noticed with the random, like as you refresh that, it was displaying 0, and then it actually updated. Are you doing AJAX calls to these endpoints in the back end to get that data on top of whatever the call is as well? Like, is there AJAX in those so that the dashboard would load and then components would load as they come into view? If one takes 5 seconds or a really long REST call or something like that, is that kind of what you're doing behind the scenes there?
Yep, so that's exactly what's happening. So when the component loads, it actually loads the actual structure of the component, and then there's an asynchronous REST call going back to the server to run the PowerShell endpoint. A lot of people have these script blocks that do this kind of thing that maybe we'll go query a server and it will take a little while for that kind of stuff to go. Later on in this talk, I'll show you some ways to kind of improve the performance of your dashboard so it's not always querying this the endpoint every single time you hit the page. So
that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, some other cool kind of components that you can use to display data inside your dashboard are things like tables. This table takes an endpoint, and then you can specify things like the different headers that I want to show inside my dashboard, and then you can output that data with this outUD table commandlet to actually select the different properties off your object to display in the table. So again, I'm calling get Strava activity here to get like the last 10 activities that I've done. I'm taking each one of those objects and kind of transforming a little bit. This is to kind of show that like this is just PowerShell. You can do whatever you want here that you could do in PowerShell. So I'm converting this one to a date time. It comes back as a string. I'm kind of parsing that. I'm taking this distance, which comes back in meters, and then converting it into miles. I'm taking this time, which is and the amount of seconds that I was moving during that activity, turning it into a time span. And then you can actually take things like other elements inside Universal Dashboard and embed them in the table. So this is actually creating a link that I want to show inside that table that actually goes out to that activity. So now if I go back to my table, you see it's created this table on the right-hand side here. The different types of activities I've done, when I've done them, the distance in miles, the amount of time that I was moving, and then it's actually produced a link that I can click. It will actually take me straight to that Strava activity. You can see that I'm actually getting that data from Strava. So that's pretty cool. But people always ooh and ah at charts. So I'm actually using a chart library called Chart.js. So Chart.js is just an open source charting library. It's super customizable. You can do all kinds of things. I've tried to expose a lot of that through UD. It's pretty hard to give every single option and make it really easy to use. So charting can get a little complicated. I'm always trying to figure out ways to make that simpler. But this is a pretty simple example of how to use this activity data to produce a chart. So I'm getting my Strava activity again, kind of this month's activity. And then I'm grouping it by type. So I have, runs, rides, and swims. And then I'm creating pretty much the number of hours that I've spent doing those things this month. So I take that data and I output it to OutUD chart data. And then I'm saying the data property is the time, because that's the time, or that's the thing that I want to count inside my chart. And then I want to label it with the type. So is it a run, a ride, or a swim? And then I can just kind of specify some colors to make it a little bit nicer. So now when we go back to my dashboard, you can see now I have this chart. The chart has the number of hours I've spent doing things. You kind of hover over it and see what those are. So this is a ride, these are runs, and this is swimming, and there's random other workouts over here. So that's just kind of how you can group it and then create these kind of interactive charts. And what's cool about charts is, like I said, they're really customizable. This is what I call a single data set chart, but you could also have multi-data set charts where it's showing two different types of information on the charts. You can customize things like the legend and the different labels and colors and hover colors. I mean, there's a million options for Chart.js, so it's pretty cool. So one simple way that we can kind of adjust this is kind of change the type of chart. So the previous chart was just a bar chart. In this case, I'm just specifying a pie chart. So this is kind of the distance traveled this month. Similar query to Strava, grouping by the same thing, activity type. The only difference this time is it's summing the distance and then converting it to miles. And then what it does is it produces a pie chart. So now you can hover over, you can see the miles traveled and that kind of thing for this month. So you could pretty much get your data from whenever, pipe it into these commandlets, and start producing charts with just kind of PowerShell script.
Really cool. You're kind of slacking on the swimming, though, there.
I know.
I'm just kidding.
I was going to try today, but I didn't get home in time. Plus, it's cold here in Wisconsin. So, all right. So that's kind of some of the visualization. So like I said, that is kind of where I'm headed for the next kind of releases. I'm hoping to add some more visualizations. I'll talk a little bit about the extensibility in a little bit of how to actually add more functionality to UD. And that's where we're going to start adding some open source visualizations and that kind of thing, where you can actually add more cool things like that to UD. But I want to talk a little bit about REST APIs because honestly, I get a lot of people actually just using the REST API part of UD and not even the visualization or website development and that kind of thing, because I think it's a good way to kind of expose data. So there are other projects out there that do this, like I think Polaris is the name of the other one. And I want to say there's some other implementations that have done REST APIs before. The idea here is that I'm taking a PowerShell endpoint and I'm exposing it over just HTTP. So the idea here is that I could call this in a web browser or any other system to kind of get that HTTP data and then use it. So I don't have to share the same technology. I don't have to share the same programming language. I can just call this endpoint from anywhere. So UD exposes the ability to create REST endpoints using the new UD endpoint commandlet. The idea here is that you can specify URL. In this case, I want activities. And then I want to use the HTTP GET method. So HTTP, if you're not super familiar with it, has a bunch of different methods that you specify. GET is for getting data, put is for updating data, post is for creating data, and delete is for deleting data. So you can specify which method you want to support here. And then when you invoke that REST endpoint, it's actually going to call this PowerShell script block. So I just exposed these Strava activity script blocks to as REST endpoints. So I've created these new endpoints, and I'm putting them in this endpoint array here, but like lower down in my script, I'm actually passing them into Start UD dashboard. You can just see I'm just passing in these endpoints. And then, yeah, so now what I can do is I can actually take invoke REST method. Oh, the other thing I guess I should mention is inside my endpoint, you have access to all the HTTP stuff. So if I wanted to get like the headers from the request, I could use this headers dictionary to look up the token, and then I could actually use that token in the Strava activity request. So this would allow anyone to call this and specify the token to get the Strava activity. So everyone's favorite little REST commandlet, invoke REST method allows you to call a REST API. So this particular one is localhost 999 is the port I'm on. It appends API in front of it, and then I have the athlete endpoint. So now when I hit enter here, it's actually going to go out and it's going to call that REST endpoint, serialize it from JSON back into an object, and then I can do whatever I want in PowerShell. But as an example of like being able to use this wherever you want, let's say I had a Linux machine and I was running curl. If I just open a regular command prompt, I could plop this curl command in there where it's actually going out and calling that same API with this token, which is an environment variable in my machine. And then curl can actually go out and communicate with that REST API. So that kind of gives you like an interop between different systems, or maybe something that doesn't have PowerShell, that kind of stuff. So but that's kind of the concept of REST. So this gives you a good way, easy way to kind of expose your PowerShell data and PowerShell commandlets in a RESTful way. Some other things to mention here, I'll get a little into authentication, but these REST endpoints you can actually lock down. So you can actually require that a user has a token that's generated by you in some way, or they have to log in to get a token, and then authenticate against the API. So you don't just have an open API to all your data. You could lock it down, that kind of thing. All right. And on that topic, we'll get into... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you're going to actually get into some of that. Okay, I was going to actually ask if, like you said, if you can actually have an endpoint that serves up a token based off of, and then from then on you would use said token, type of thing.
Yep, exactly. So it is currently using, I don't actually have a demo set up for that, but it's using Java or JSON web tokens. So you'd have an endpoint that you authenticate against, and it provides a JSON web token, and then you can use that token, until it expires. There's lots of things like the ability to grant these JSON web tokens. So you can set an expiration, you can provide a username, you can sign it with a key, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. So you can lock down the APIs, but you can also lock down the dashboards, which I'm going to show you a super simple example of that. To add authentication to the dashboard, what you're actually going to do is use new UD login page, which creates a new login page, and then you can specify one or more authentication methods that a user could actually use to authenticate against your dashboard. So in this case, this authentication method here is just an endpoint. And the idea is that you could actually specify a credential parameter here, and you could get the credential from UD and then process that however you want. So you could take that and send it to Active Directory. You could, you maybe have a database of credentials, that kind of thing. And then you could return, whether or not success or fail, however that may be, using new UD authentication result. So in this super simple example, I'm just letting myself in by saying success, and I'm setting my username to Adam. And then after you create your login page, all you have to do is just set the login page parameter on new UD dashboard, and it will actually make sure that your users are authenticated when they go to the dashboard. So now my dashboard's reloaded, and you can see I have a login page. I no longer can just kind of go to my pages. Remember, I had like basics, but it's gonna forward me back to my login page since I'm not authenticated. But if I just log in, you can see I'm logged in, and I can access all my pages, that kind of thing. It has a little sign out button, and it would take me back to my login page. I'm no longer authenticated.
Do we get all the cat GIFs with the universal dashboard?
You can. All you have to do is sign up for a Giphy app, and then you can have as many cat GIFs as you can take. All right, I'll show you how I did that at the end. All right, so that's kind of authentication. It's really important. It's kind of a boring topic for some people, but it also supports things like UD. I just prefix everything with UD from now on. Different providers, so you can see that it automatically supports Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Twitter. So you can select one of those, and then all you have to do is specify your app ID and secret that you get from registering an app with Twitter or Facebook, and then plug that in, and then users can automatically sign in via those things to your app. So pretty cool. All right, so now we're going to get into some of my favorite things. Sorry, go ahead.
You have a full-time job, right?
I do.
And dude, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Seriously,
that's what I do for fun.
You're just like, 4 authentication providers out of the box. No big deal. Like, what? Yeah, all of us are just like mind blown. So
yeah, good. No, keep going. I like blowing people's minds.
Dude, yeah, no, keep going. You're awesome, man.
All right, cool. All right, now we're gonna kind of skim through some custom element stuff. So in the more recent versions of UD have started exposing the ability to create custom elements. So there's this new UD element command. This allows you to create these arbitrary HTML, which actually translates to React elements. And this particular thing is a div, so it's just an HTML element, and then you can specify attributes on it. So a style, like a CSS inline style with padding, background color, that kind of thing, and then content. So the idea here is that I'm creating this element that just turns itself into an HTML tag on the client side. So, what happened? Oh, maybe I'm going to take that login page off so I don't have to worry about that. Save that guy. And hopefully it reloads. All right. So now you can see I just created this div with a bunch of padding and it's black and white. So that's cool. I can create arbitrary HTML elements. What's cool is that like the new version, HTML is really powerful these days. So I can do crazy stuff like create SVG tags. So if I wanted to create an SVG image, you can actually draw that in UD using UD element. So I'm creating an SVG tag that has a certain height and width. I want to create a rectangle in it. That's offset a little bit. It has some rounded corners. It's 150 by 150, and then I styled it red and black with a little opacity. So now when you go to UD, you can see it actually drew that rectangle using just new UD element PowerShell script. But you can take it even a step further and I've exposed ways to, this is like getting real crazy because you have to use JavaScript and that kind of thing, but you can actually consume JavaScript libraries and create additional PowerShell modules that inject into UD. And this actually uses what's called the Sparklines. So there's React Sparklines, and Sparklines are just little charts that show data. So you can see here, I just have like numbers, and that's usually what a Sparkline is for. Like you'd shove it in like a table or something like that, or a grid, and it would just show you a little bit of information about the, my last 10 requests took this amount of time, that kind of thing. But this is actually a custom element here, and it actually created these little, this little Sparkline chart here. But what's neat about that, it was actually a PowerShell module up on the gallery that you can download and install, and it actually adds these elements into UD. So it actually adds additional JavaScript elements into UD. So that's kind of my example for creating your own custom JavaScript elements as well. So you can take it pretty far. But most recently, my adventure has been into trying to make it so that people can generate UIs that are very similar to what you would see in Windows Forms or WPF. So you can create buttons, and then you can update the content of a page based on some sort of event. So you have a new UD button, you click it, you have an on-click event handler, and just like you would in like a Windows Forms app, you'd create a script block that does something. So in this case, we call set UD element that sets the ID, or it sets the content of this particular element to, dude, you click the button. So now when we go back to UD and you click this button, you can see it actually updates the page based on your click. So you could have that button go out, and people are doing stuff like installing software or running tests, that kind of thing. So it doesn't just need to update the page, but you could have it kind of do something else, update the user about what it's doing, that kind of thing. There's some other kind of commandlets around that kind of genre. You can add elements, so it'll actually add one element into the content of another element. So you can see here, I just have another unordered list, and then I'm just adding list items in there that are the current date. So in UD, you'll see that it just adds those in there. So you can add other elements, you can add text, you can put whatever you want in there, and then you can clear those elements. So this is like I don't like dates, and it clears those elements. And then as kind of an example of what you can do is like I actually have an endpoint here that just runs forever, and it just updates the website, this digital ID with the current date and time, and it's just running all the time. So now when you go back to UD, what you'll see is it's just a clock, because it's just continuously running and then updating the UI based on what that script block is doing. So to kind of like, I went way too far with this, so I'm going to show you an example of taking this way too far quick. As an example, when I first came out with this functionality, was I actually built a chat room with UD. So if you actually log into this chat room example, this is up on GitHub, you can check it out. It actually has this chat room which connects to a database, a SQL database, and gets and stores chat messages in there. So you could say, hey, so I logged in as Adam, and now it's actually sending that message and putting it on the website. But what's neat about this is if I log in, I just opened an incognito window so that I'm not in the same session. I logged in as like Jeff. Now when I say hello, you're going to see it updates in both places because it's actually sending those messages back and forth. And then in the example, it has a bunch of SQL in the back end, and it's actually updating this database with those messages. So if you went and looked, it's actually updating those messages in the database. Yeah, so that's an example of me taking this pretty far, but fun nonetheless. All right. So those are custom elements. That's getting a little advanced. All that stuff's up on Gitbook. More information about creating custom elements, and that kind of, it seems like that's where a lot of people are heading, to create dynamic UIs. So I hope to get a lot more examples out there about that stuff, and kind of some additional, I guess, information and that kind of thing, because it's cool when it works, and it's got a little bit of a learning curve. I just want to talk a little bit about, like what I said about performance and kind of some of the new stuff that came out in 1.6. I actually created scheduled endpoints and session and cache variables, which are kind of two things that are new in 1.6. So the idea with the scheduled endpoint is that you can create an endpoint rather than it being just a REST API. It's not a REST API at all, actually. It's more like a scheduled task. So just like you would say, start or new scheduled task, and you could put it in the task schedule and it runs PowerShell and all that kind of stuff. This is very similar to that, where you can actually create a script block that runs on some interval. So you can specify every minute or every hour, every day, that kind of thing. But then you pass that schedule into new UD endpoint, and then it will run that on a schedule. The other half of this is that it's using two new providers. Well, this one's using one provider, but I introduced two new providers in UD in the current version. One of them being the cache provider. What the cache provider allows you to do is just store data in the cache. So instead of storing or retrieving the data all the time, like I'm not going to do an activity every 5 minutes or anything like that. So whenever someone visits my website, there's no need for me to actually go out and see what my activities were every single time someone visits my website. So instead, what I can do is introduce a scheduled endpoint and then store that data in the cache. So it goes out to Strava, gets my activities, or actually in this case, it's getting an athlete, and it's storing it in this cache variable. And then what I can do is I can use that cache variable anywhere else in UD. You can use it in any endpoint, and then you can that data is just retrieved from that variable rather than actually going out to Strava or anything like that. And then I can do things like create another REST endpoint that gets from the cache rather than ever actually going to Strava. So it's just returning the value of this variable. So I want to show an example of that. Let's see if I can clear this. So now I have this this endpoint here, and if I wanted to call that a bunch of times to Strava, it's going to be really really slow, and it's going to rate limit me eventually. Strava's going to rate limit me. But if we're in a cache like this, let's see if I can type. I was supposed to type this before instead of you guys watching me type. All right, yep, so you can see that's pretty fast, but how fast is it? So let's actually look at that. Measure command. So I can call my REST endpoint 100 times in 477 milliseconds. So rather than going out to Strava 100 times and waiting for them to return their data and everything like that, I've cached this locally, and then I can return it extremely fast. So if you wanted to use this data in charts and grids and all that kind of stuff, this would kind of be the recommended way to go, because then you could go look up your data, cache it anytime someone visits your website. It's very fast for them, and then you don't have to worry about resource utilization on the back end. So that was kind of the idea of some of the new features in UD, was kind of make that stuff a little bit more, I guess, performant.
Hey, Adam.
Yeah.
With the, so say you did this for the very first time, I'm assuming, is that schedule when the web service or when the service for UD starts, it fires off all of the schedules, or like when is that initial run done, I guess?
Yeah, the initial run will be right away, but now that you bring it up, it'd probably be good. The scheduling library that I'm using actually has a delay parameter, so it might be something good to expose. But yeah, right now it's just as you start it up, it's going to run all that stuff. So if you have a lot of scheduled endpoints, I could see that being a little bit of a problem.
Gotcha. I didn't know if there was any, you said, hey, I'm just going to kind of refresh everything at a 10-minute interval second, or 10-minute second, or 10 minutes interval if all of a sudden they'd start butting heads and you'd have, spikes in performance or something like that.
Right. And I think that right now would be a problem, and it's something that I could alleviate now that we are talking about it. I hadn't really thought about that before.
No, no worries.
All right. So that kind of brings me to
I have
the
one last
end.
question
Oh, yeah.
before we move. Yeah. So, is there a way for me to set it like some sort of auto regen time in the dashboard? So, earlier on, you'd shown like data that updates every time you refresh. Is there an option to say like refresh this data live every 30 seconds or 60 seconds or something if I've left the page open?
Oh, right. Oh, man. That's something that I can actually show off right now with this cat GIF.
Nice.
So it's
Cat
something I
gifts for
kind
the
of
win.
failed to mention. Like yeah, like a lot of people want to have a dashboard maybe on a big screen or something like that showing data, kind of auto refreshing. So charts and tables and grids and even new UD elements all support auto refresh. So every single one of those elements you just specify auto refresh and then it defaults to like 10 seconds or 60 seconds. I guess I don't really remember. But then you can specify a refresh interval. So like in this example, it's refreshing every 5 seconds. It'll actually go back and call this endpoint and then auto refresh that data on the page. So your page will, your components will reload. So the whole page doesn't reload, just the components themselves. So that's what I was doing with this cat GIF. So you can see here that I have a UD element. It's just a div that has an endpoint that is auto refreshing every 5 seconds. And then every time it auto refreshes, it generates this heading, and then it also goes and looks up a random Giphy image of a kitten, and then creates that image. So if we actually go to the more resources page, you'll see that every 5 seconds it should reload that image. So you can do the same thing with charts and tables and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna put this dashboard up on GitHub. I can send a link out. I have a presentations repo where I put all my. Actually, I think it's already up there. Now that I say that, I'll just show you guys that. So I have a presentations repo up here, and then the presentation PS1 is that whole universal dashboard presentation that you guys can play with if you want. And then on the last page here in the resources, it has a bunch more resources about documentation. That's all in Gitbook. I have an issue tracker up on GitHub. Lots of people throw issues up there. I have a chat room that's starting to get a lot more interest where people are kind of helping each other out with dashboards and that kind of thing. Store to buy licenses, and then I have a bunch of open source stuff. Like one thing to note that I guess I didn't really mention is that all the controls are now open source, or most of them, except for the charts and charts and grids, are all open source. So they're all produced with the new UD element stuff. So you can see examples of how I actually produce those elements, or add new functionality if you wanted to, or add new controls, that kind of thing. So I'm actually packaging these all up in the Universal Dashboard module. And yeah, so that's all up there, and you can go to the GitHub repo to see all that stuff. Yeah, so are there any other questions?
Okay, there we go. Sorry, mic takes a second to come on. I did have a
That's good.
question, like seeing that you had, where you could basically just do a kind of a SOA implementation where there's no front end, but you expose all the endpoints. Is there any type of thought or part of that where like it's document, like you could hit like Swagger, something to where it's exposed where you can actually see it's, kind of a REST API Explorer type thing?
So yeah, not yet. It's actually on my roadmap because what I was waiting for is the ASP.NET team has some stuff coming out in the next version of ASP.NET Core that is actually going to make that really cool. So I'm hoping to be able to harness some of that to make it so that you can actually see a Swagger UI. And then the other thing that's cool is if you have the Swagger kind of endpoint set up, you can use things like, oh God, I don't remember the name of it now. It's like PowerShell. There's like some PowerShell module that actually takes Swagger documentation and generates PowerShell clients based on that. So you could use that as well. So it
Yeah,
would automatically generate that stuff. So.
Mr. Lombardi was saying it's just literally called PS Swagger. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Cool.
so, close. And the random cat imaging changes. That's awesome.
Yeah, right. I wonder how long it's going to take before Giphy rate limits me.
Right. We'll just throw it up on 1,500 sites. It'll be all right.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Throw it up in Azure and just scale it.
Cool. Yeah. Well, love to hear what you guys come up with. Let me know. It's cool to see what people are using it for. I'm always impressed. So.
Yeah. So about 60 seconds ago, I went and put together a GitHub project under the user group's namespace for a user group dashboard. I expect that we're going to spend like the next 2 hours hacking on this.
All right. Sounds awesome.
This is awesome.
Cool, man. I'm excited to see you guys come up with, and yeah.
Thank you so much for presenting.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for listening to me talk for so long.
Could you just real quick go over your licensing again? I know you kind of touched on that. I just want to.
Yeah, sure. So right now it's 99 per server. It's perpetual, so if you build a dashboard and you're happy with the version, just keep running it forever, and then you get a free year of updates. So I hope that we keep ramping on this, so you can just keep updating for a year. And then, like I said, you can develop for free. You don't have to buy a license if you're just developing, because the dashboard has a 1 hour time limit, and then you can just keep restarting the dashboard, kind of like I was showing today, where it just auto reloads itself. That's considered restarting the dashboard. So you'll pretty much never run into that hour if you are developing it. So.
Okay, cool. And then thereafter, if you're like, hey, I want to keep going, is it you just re-up the 99 for the next year and keep going?
Yep. So I don't have,
like software assurance. Yeah, no, not worried about it. So. $99 is cheap for everything you've just showed us, dude. Move the decimal point, to the right for your sake, because holy shit. So I did have some questions, like your providers that you had, like the Microsoft, Twitter, all those things. Like, is that literally you just plug that in and then it like O365, like users, like as far as we're fed, like worldwide, for an example, has federated itself now with Microsoft for O365 back to our own identity provider. But in this case, like if I were to put that in and say I wanted to secure this endpoint, but it requires a Microsoft, what is that public? Like, is that my Outlook.com? Is that enterprise level Microsoft authentication? What is that authentication?
That's a really good question. It kind of depends what Microsoft supports in terms of their OAuth endpoint. So I would have to look into that a little bit more. Yeah, because I'm not 100% sure if that supports like your enterprise Microsoft authentication.
Or if it's just like that's my Outlook account login.
Right, and that's what I have tested it with. I've never actually tried it with an O365 thing, so I'd be really surprised if they didn't support that, but who knows?
Sure. Now, when you do that, when you have a login and you say, okay, they've successfully logged in with their personal Outlook.com, is that you would just as long as they've logged in, you would just say, okay, authentication, that was a success, and let them in. If you wanted to have a gate on there that said, well, these people can sign up and register for access versus just let anybody who has an Outlook.com, access my API. Do you have any controls or anything in there for that? Or is it just kind of with those providers, if they have an account, they're in?
Right now, if they have an account they're in, I have a lot of asks for that, like pages, that are tied to users. The one thing you have information about is the user that's logged in. So once you log in, you have a user variable that you have available in all your endpoints. So then you can do things there to kind of customize it, but there's nothing really built in. You'd have to write all that logic yourself.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's a whole like role-based access model, which yikes.
Yeah,
So I
right.
started
I
going,
know.
I started going through your documentation, and the first thing I want to say is this is an incredible level of documentation for one person. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And then the second thing is I saw in there that there's a bit of information about running the dashboard itself as a service. Is it possible to just run the REST API as a service?
Yep. So there is another commandlet called start UD REST API rather than start UD dashboard that just exposes the REST API. So if you didn't want the dashboard at all, you could do that.
Okay, and then the publish UD dashboard would be the same thing and still wrap it into the service?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. I think we're questioned out.
You're
All
crazy,
right.
by the way.
Cool.
Absolutely crazy. So, but really awesome work, man.
Thank you so
This
much.
is great.
Yeah, no problem. Glad you think it's cool.
Definitely.
All right, sweet. Well, yeah, thanks for having me again. I totally appreciate it. And yeah, just let me know if you guys ever have any questions or anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll do.
We'll probably be messaging you shortly.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
All right, have a good night.
Yeah, you
Thank you,
too.
sir.
Talk to you later. Yep, bye.